If your dough keeps coming out flat or with tunneling holes through it, it is most likely over or under fermented. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what under fermented dough looks like, what properly fermented dough looks like, and what over fermented dough looks like. Not just in the bowl, but baked, so that you can see the difference that bulk fermentation really makes in your final bread. Once you can read your dough, your sourdough loaves become consistent, tall, and airy. Here is our dough that is under fermented. I will leave the recipe that I used for all of the loaves in the description. But here's how we're gonna tell that it is not done with the bulk fermentation. First of all, it has barely grown. It's only been about an hour since I did the last lift and fold, and it has barely grown at all since then. So it's definitely risen less than 30%. And if you look at the dough, it just looks very tight and compact instead of fluffy and aerated. And because it doesn't look aerated, then we can know that the carbon dioxide has not been produced enough to make it rise and make it look airy. Another way we can tell is that there are not a lot of bubbles on this dough. We can definitely see some bubbles forming, but typically there would be many more bubbles than what we're seeing here. If you see a lot of bubbles, that's usually a better sign that a lot of carbon dioxide is being produced. The last test that we're going to do to see if it is under fermented or fermented properly or over fermented is the jiggle test. So if I take my bowl and I go like this back and forth, you can see that the dough is barely moving. And if it's barely moving, that means that it's not ready. It needs to ferment longer. The last thing that we're going to see is that when we dump out under fermented dough, it's going to stick to the bowl. So that's not really a great sign that you can do before dumping it out of the bowl, but it is kind of a helpful post sign to see if you were correct in your assessment, because a properly fermented dough should fall out of the bowl. All right, this is what it looks like. As you can see, I've been trying to dump it out and it is just sticking completely to the bowl, not coming off at all. So I'm going to use my hand to dislodge it. Oh, that is so not aerated at all. As you can see, it does not want to come off of the bowl. When you get it onto your counter like this, you can see that it has no life to it at all. It is just flat, not airy, very lifeless in its form. After I pre-shape it, I will final shape it and then throw it in the fridge, and we will bake this loaf tomorrow to see what under fermenting your dough looks like in the final crumb. Here is our properly fermented dough. Now, as you can see here, the dough is properly aerated. It looks very full of life and full of air. We have bubbles around the dough, but more importantly than that, it has risen by about, I would say, 50 to 75%. It is full of air. It is domed at the top. You can see it's pulling away from all of the edges. And if I try to pull it away from the edge right here, you can see that it pulls away from the edge of the bowl, just like that. So this is a really, really great dough. It is ready to be shaped. It's full of carbon dioxide, and it is going to make amazing bread. So this is what your dough would look like when it is done with the bulk fermentation. So let's dump this out and see what we're working with. And remember, a really great sign that the dough is properly fermented is that it comes out cleanly from the bowl. Here we have it. Do you see how much more life this dough has to it than the under fermented dough? It is just, it's bouncy, it's full of air, it's really ready to be shaped into an incredible, incredible dough. So this is actually 2 loaves. I'm going to split it into 2 and then pre-shape both of them. And then I will final shape both of them. And after I final shape both of them, I will throw them into a banneton to cold proof overnight in the fridge. After it cold proofs overnight in the fridge, we can bake them tomorrow so you can see what your crumb and your dough should look like when it has been properly fermented. Give them a little wiggle and we'll let them sit, and then we will see what they look like tomorrow. Here we have our over fermented dough. Now this dough has been in the bulk fermentation since about 10 this morning, so it's been about 11 and a half hours. Now the first thing that you might notice is it doesn't look like it's super bubbly. Well, sometimes when the dough has lost the carbon dioxide or it's unevenly distributed, you won't see a bunch of bubbles. There's some, but not a bunch. Now this dough has grown by, it's at least doubled in size. I think probably it's grown by about 125%, maybe 150, so it's grown too much. The carbon dioxide has made it grow very tall, but the bacteria and the acid from the bacteria has been eating away at the gluten structure because we've let it go too far. So if I touch the dough like that, you see how fragile it is? It is sticky and it's lost all structure. Look, it just moves like water. It moves like water in the bowl. And that's because the acid has literally been eating away at that gluten structure. So if I pull it away from the sides, you can see it's still sticky. It sticks to the sides. It doesn't come off like it did for the other dough. See, all of that is stuck. That is stuck to the dough. If it is over fermented, don't worry about it. You can make focaccia, you can still bake it. I mean, it'll still be delicious, but these are the signs that you're gonna wanna look for. I am now going to dump out this dough, but when your dough is over fermented, it will most likely leave behind a very stringy mess. Exactly. Look at that. That is exactly what you are going to see when you have over fermented your dough. But you can still get it out of the bowl and add it to the dough on the counter, and you can still make amazing bread. It's just not going to be that great rise and amazing crumb that you were looking for. Now when I've dumped it onto the countertop like this, you can see that the dough is first of all super sticky. Super sticky. Oh my goodness, sticky. It's gonna stick to everything. But second of all, you can also see that it has just flattened out. It has no strength and no structure to it whatsoever. That is a confirmation sign that it is overproofed. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-shape this dough, and then I will final shape it, and we will bake it up tomorrow morning. We will compare all of the loaves side by side. All right, I will see you tomorrow. We've made all the loaves. Here is the under-fermented, the properly fermented, and the over-fermented. Right away, I can tell this is exactly what an under-fermented loaf is going to look like. I call it the false hope loaf because you see that it's tall and puffy, so you're hoping that it's perfectly fermented, but when we open it up, you're gonna see I am betting an irregular crumb. So let's cut these two open and compare them to the properly fermented loaf. Here is the under-fermented loaf. That's exactly right. This is exactly what we thought was going to happen. There are so many air pockets and tunneling and holes in this loaf because when we are under fermenting the loaf, we're not allowing that carbon dioxide to get evenly distributed throughout the dough. And if that happens when it gets inside the oven, the carbon dioxide is in random pockets and it aggressively bursts open, and that gives us these gigantic holes and the tunneling. All of those irregular crumbs are from the under-fermented dough. So if you have not given your dough time to evenly distribute all of the carbon dioxide, letting it grow, letting it mature, letting it ferment, this is what you're going to end up with. Let's move on to the over-fermented dough. Now my prediction for this dough is that it's going to look shaggy because like we said, the enzymes are breaking down that gluten structure. And if they're breaking down the gluten structure, It's not gonna have that strength that you're wanting your sourdough to have. Here we go. That's exactly right. That is exactly what we would expect from over-fermented sourdough. So if you bake your sourdough, if the holes look like this and almost kind of melt into one another, they look very shaggy, very raggedy, that is over-fermented. And again, that's because the enzymes have been breaking down that gluten structure. So there we go for the over-fermented. Here is the perfectly fermented. This is exactly what you want to see from a perfectly fermented sourdough loaf. As you can see, we are tall from shoulder to shoulder. All the holes are evenly distributed throughout the whole loaf. It is truly what perfect sourdough really does look like. The difference between this dough, and this dough is all simply in the bulk fermentation. Bulk fermentation is one of the most difficult parts about sourdough. So if you are still struggling knowing whether your dough is done with its bulk fermentation or not, I have made a free guide for you and linked it in the description so that you can know when sourdough fermentation is done and what is actually going on during bulk fermentation. So if you'd like that free guide, I've linked it in the description. If you want to learn more about what your crumb results are trying to tell you, watch this video. Make sure to download the free bulk fermentation guide in the description, and I will see you next time.